The world needs old coins. For months have passed since the breach at Depau. In the early days of the leak, it did cause panic among some people. However, the arrival of the biological crisis is not as terrifying as imagined. At least in the area where Che Shiyu is, it's not that serious. Being a zombie, and a conscious zombie at that, is really not a good thing. Because he cannot rush into the city like those zombies who have no intelligence and only know how to eat meat and then be cleared out in 3 seconds. They also cannot pass body temperature checks and live in a community like normal humans. Therefore, he can only live outside. Moreover, since becoming a zombie, his genes have been collapsing. It's not just him. It should be said that most zombies are like this. They must acquire new genes to continue to live. This is why zombies eat like crazy. Now, Che Shiyu, who had been hungry for more than 10 days, was already at the critical stage. All the zombies on the streets of the city had been basically cleared away. Only the sewer where he was hiding allowed him to escape several searches. I really envy the zombies of a certain country. Well, if you endure it a little longer, you should be fine once the vaccine comes out. Che Shiyu, who was stinking all over, twisted his severely worn bones and sat in the smelly sewer, listening to the sound of rats climbing and pieces of rotten flesh falling from his body. He was used to the stench. Just when he was about to fall into a deep sleep and reduce his physical energy consumption, he heard a very distant sound that seemed to come from deep space. Listener, I offer you my blood, call with my soul, and build an eternal bridge. I will offer my blood and my spirit to make a contract with you, and I will satisfy everything you want. Satisfied with everything? The inexplicable sound aroused Che Shiyu's throbbing. Is it because she was too hungry? Already hallucinating, whispering sound. If it can really satisfy the hunger in my belly, then it's not impossible. The contract is made. Buzz. The sound was like a bell from a bell, and the words fell instantly. A twisted force in the dark suddenly sucked Che Shiyu, who was stiff, and the force was so powerful that it actually dragged him directly into the boundless hell. The surrounding environment was distorted, and a dazzling light flashed. When he regained consciousness, the stench around him disappeared, replaced by the smell of blood that made his soul tremble. On the ground, there are hill-like lizards, elephant-like giant wolves, and plant vines flowing with green blood. Smell this blood mixed with all kinds of life. He could feel his genes trembling. This was not fear, but desire. This was the desire for flesh and blood. He had not eaten for more than 10 days. He needed to repair the damaged genes, and in front of him was a plate of feast. Is that voice real? Kill him. Kill the man in front of you. What? Just when Che Shiyu was about to pounce on the corpses, he suddenly heard a voice coming from the depths of his soul. Then he felt that his hands and feet were being manipulated, and he was being manipulated to walk to the side. How could it be that your hands and feet don't obey your orders? Che Shiyu looked in the direction of movement. On a huge, colorful python corpse sat a blond boy. Although the corners of his mouth were bloody, his eyes were as sharp as an eagle, and his whole body exuded the aura of Shura, who had stepped out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The blond boy gritted his teeth, anger burst out of his eyes, and hatred devoured everything, but he could no longer move. Che Shiyu, who was almost controlled by desire, suddenly woke up. Is this still that place? Kill him and bring back his belongings. The unquestionable command came from behind again. This kind of command that penetrated deeply into the soul did not need to be communicated with words. It was transmitted directly through the soul. And he, like a robot being given instructions, had no power to resist at all. When he heard the familiar voice, he immediately quickly integrated all the information, including the environment and the summoning oath he had responded to before. Come to a conclusion. I should have been summoned. He has even experienced zombie outbreaks. He has seen scenes large and small, and his mind has been tempered thousands of times. After knowing his situation, he immediately observed the surrounding environment. Seeing the countless dead and injured beasts on the ground, he observed the wounds of those beasts. All injuries were from one direction, if analyzed by ballistic trajectories. The source is that boy. With so many beasts dead, could it be that these beasts were also controlled by him and rushed towards the boy? At this time, Chae-Shiyu realized that the other party was using it as cannon fodder. Damn it! Although Chae-Shiyu knew that he was cannon fodder, he could not change his fate, because under the restrictions of a certain contract, all orders would be enforced. Moreover, he did not dare to look back because he was not sure whether the people behind him would become suspicious because of his turning back. I just want to survive. Give me a few more months, and the vaccine will be out. The blonde boy's chest was rising and falling violently. Although he was furious, his body was already dry and oily. Chae-Shiyu moved his stiff steps. Due to the lack of body fluids, his bones were severely worn, so he was like a zombie. Every time he moved, his bones would make several sounds. Although I am not a necromancer, I summoned a small undead. Although it is only a small level 0 undead, it is enough to kill you. Snap. Chae-Shiyu's stiff body found it extremely difficult to move on the road littered with corpses. Although he was careful enough, he still tripped over the corpses and fell to the ground. Whispering sound. The summoner behind him made a disdainful mockery, but then he coughed heavily, and with a whoosh, something spewed out of his mouth. If my body hadn't reached its limit, I wouldn't have needed this level 0 undead creature to kill you for me. I'm not willing to give in. I'm not willing to give in. It turns out he was injured too. When Chae-Shiyu heard the sound of vomiting blood behind her, she felt confident. Chae-Shiyu crawled for 10 minutes in just a few dozen meters. Just when Chae-Shiyu climbed on top of the giant python and stood in front of the blonde boy, he saw the hateful look in his eyes. Although he couldn't understand the other party's voice, the look of hatred was unforgettable and creepy. Kill him. The absolute order was issued again. Chae-Shiyu knew that she could not resist this order and could only follow it. It was clear that death was coming, but the blonde boy showed no fear at all. His eyes were full of unwillingness and determination. Not good. This is not the expression of a dying person. Chae-Shiyu forcibly moved his body halfway, and a light flashed on the chest of the young man in front of him. There was a flash of light, like a laser sword that opened a fist-sized hole in his right rib. Originally, this light was aimed at Chae-Shiyu's heart, but he forcefully deflected the damage. When the light disappeared, the blonde boy was not at all happy about destroying the undead in front of him. Instead, his pupils shrank and he looked a little desperate. The summoner who controlled Chae-Shiyu laughed maniacally, which was in sharp contrast to the desperate expression of the blonde boy. I just used a level 0 undead to test out your final trump card. Haha, it's worth it. Ahem. The ultimate grimoire is mine. The blonde boy looked at Chae-Shiyu next to him with great hatred. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. The reason why he acted so weak was to lure the other party to take the bait and kill him as a last resort. Who would have thought that the other party would be so cautious? Even if he looked like he was about to die, the other party would rather use a large amount of his blood to summon an inconspicuous undead rather than get within 10 steps of him. I'm not willing to give in. I'm really not willing to give in. This is really desperate. After being hit by that ray of light, Chae-Shiyu's body functions were once again on the verge of collapse, and she needed more genes in exchange for genetic stability. So, he has no choice. Ah, the blonde boy screamed, and the summoner raised his eyebrows. Haha, he's not dead. This level 0 undead is beyond my expectation. Seeing the death of the blonde boy, The summoner breathed a sigh of relief and gave the next order. Bring back the ultimate grimoire, my servant. Servant. Che-Shi listened to the other party's order and turned around slowly. I have already carried out your order, but what about your promise? I'm still hungry. Chapter 2, The Old Guy Deserves to Go to Hell. Che-Shi picked up the boy's package. It was heavy, and a book appeared in the corner of the package. This book should be what the other party wanted. Killing for a book. On the ground, the seriously injured white wolf staggered up, almost falling, and shook his head. The summoner looked at Bai Lang, who was still alive, and Che-Shi, who had completed the task, feeling indescribably satisfied. White wolf, I need you to carry me away. As for the low-level undead, after taking the things over, go find a place to commit suicide. My majestic summoner actually summoned such a thing. Suicide is also a command, an irresistible force of contract. After completing a series of instructions, the summoner breathed a sigh of relief, then propped his elbows on the tree stump behind him, lowered his head, and panted. He summoned and sacrificed all the summoned objects, spent all his accumulation over the decades, and gambled heavily on this battle. To him, it was all worth it because he won. As long as he gets that treasure, he can start all over again. However, he waited for a long time, but the white wolf still did not move, while Che-Shi stood on top of the giant python, motionless, with those cold eyes watching him from above. Apparently, for some reason, he resisted his order to bring the things over. The summoner, who had been fighting a life and death battle for many years, felt something was not right. He raised his head and looked through his hood, just in time to meet Che-Shi's eyes. It was also at this time that Che-Shi saw his true appearance. A frail old man with all white hair and a purple robe, hiding his thin body inside. When the summoner saw Che-Shi's eyes, his heart trembled. He had experienced too much. How could he admit his mistake when he looked at his prey like this? Moreover, undead creatures, which are low-level life forms without intelligence, show such eyes. Despicable low-level undead. What are you doing? Get what I want quickly. The summoner ordered angrily. He panicked. Despicable. This soul connection allows the other party's words to be conveyed in the form of information, except for those commands that he can understand. These non-command messages spoken by the summoner himself were also understood by Cha Shiruo because they were included in the commands. Cannon fodder? Servant? Despicable? Such a bossy attitude and domineering orders. Che-Shi's eyes became colder and colder. You make me very unhappy. However, Che-Shi did not obey his order this time. He stood high, motionless, and stared at him indifferently. The summoner saw that Che-Shi had once again resisted his order, which intensified the uneasiness in his heart. The summoned object he had summoned actually resisted his order. This was something that had never happened before. Is it because my mental energy is exhausted and I can no longer control it? Things like undead really cannot be like ordinary summoned beasts. Thinking of this, the summoner showed a sinister expression, very decisively and directly ordered, White Wolf, kill him. The summoner felt extremely awake. Fortunately, there was a white wolf, otherwise he would have to do it himself. In the summoner industry, there is an unwritten rule. If the summoned object resists the summoner's order, it must be dealt with in time. Otherwise, if the summoned object rebels against the enemy in the future, it will be a very terrible thing. Of course, summons rarely defy the summoner's example. In a way, it is impossible for the summoned object to violate the summoner's order, because as long as the summoner signs a contract, he can exercise absolute control over the summoned object through mental power and instructions. Now, however, there are apparently exceptions. Although this undead creature helped him a lot, however, he would never allow the existence of the undead that he could not control. The summoner suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He had trained the white wolves since childhood. Even if there was no contract, they were his most loyal dogs. Dogs are man's best friend. How could it be? The next second, the summoner felt a black shadow pass before his eyes, and then a smelly breath hit his face. The huge white wolf stood directly in front of him, opened its bloody mouth, and bit his outstretched arm. Click. A clear voice sounded. The summoner's eyes widened with an expression of disbelief. How could? He had raised this white wolf since he was a child. He had poured all his blood into it. He was closer than his own son. How could it bite him? It was impossible. However, the white wolf didn't give him any time to think about why. At this time, the white wolf was like a hungry wild dog, grabbing the summoner's hand and throwing it around. Tear. Sunbai's bones were pulled out directly from his arm. The summoner flew out like a kite, with its string broken. Cough poof. The summoner hit a tree and was seriously injured originally, but this time, the injury was even more serious. A large mouthful of blood vomited out of his mouth, as if it was for nothing. And he was holding his left arm in pain, with one eye open, watching his arm being held in the mouth by the white wolf, his face full of fear. There was also the guy standing on top of the giant python. Just looking at him, he felt a chill rising from the soles of his feet and up his spine. Go bum, go bum. The white wolf chewed twice, raised his head, and swallowed his bones mixed with sticky flesh and blood into his stomach. Only then did he notice. The white wolf's abdomen was torn open with a huge wound, and its internal organs were being dragged on the ground. With this level of injury, Bai Lang should be dead. How could? The summoner couldn't understand it, but he didn't need to understand it. The bloodthirsty white wolf had already opened its bloody mouth and pounced on him again. Damn it. However, it was too late for him to hide this time. The bloodthirsty white wolf bit his skull into pieces. Boom. For a moment, the summoner's brain exploded, falling apart like a ripe watermelon. Che Shiyu, who was standing on top of the giant python, finally felt that the suppression on his soul disappeared after the death of the summoner. The death of the summoner meant that he had broken away from the power of the contract. Now he was a free body, a kind of liberation from the depths of his soul, allowing all the hair on his body to welcome new life. I'm free. Che Shiyu raised his elbows. The stiff arms seemed to have relaxed a lot, and even the damaged and ulcerated skin was getting better. In addition, Cha Shiyu finally discovered something new, something that allowed him to survive in this world. When he found that he could not resist the summoner's order, he had already planned to infect a white wolf as his trump card. He tripped in the middle, also to infect a white wolf. He kept his stiff movements. On the one hand, his body was indeed severely worn. On the other hand, it was purely because he deliberately delayed the time, just to leave enough time for the white wolf to completely transform into a zombie. He doesn't want to be controlled by others, so the easiest way is to kill the person who controls him. The death of the blonde boy was an accident, but also inevitable. Cha Shiyu needed to control the white wolf to kill the summoner, and to control the white wolf, his genes needed to be in a stable state. Infecting zombies and controlling infected people is one of his abilities as a zombie. If it weren't for this ability, he would have been caught like other zombies. The other party's order is indeed irresistible, just like the boss's job. You can't refuse. Although it's irresistible, you can put your partner's shoes in the middle. The instructions used by the other party are just simple commands from point to point, without a detailed description of the intermediate process. This means that as long as the result required by the other party is achieved, it does not matter how it is achieved. So that gives him a lot of room to maneuver. Including the initial climb to the top of the giant python before taking action, it was also a test of the other party's order. He killed the blonde boy and accomplished his purpose. Although he was infected by a zombie wolf in the middle and delayed the time, he did complete the task. As for resisting the other party's order to come back, it was very simple. This was because Cha Shiyu buried his legs into the ribs and gaps of the corpse, letting the bones get stuck in his leg bones, forcing him to be unable to move. This was a method he only thought of when he saw the body of the blonde boy. In this way, in the other party's eyes, it was Cha Shiyu who resisted his order. In fact, he didn't disobey the order because his leg was stuck and he couldn't move. Of course, in addition to gaining freedom, Cha Shiyu also gained new genes. The appearance of this kind of thing let him know how to go in the future. Giant wolf gene, increased speed, not digested. Shadow clan genes, increased speed, not yet digested. Python gene, increased flexibility, not yet digested. The flesh and blood of the giant python increases flexibility and helps the body recover, while the genes of the giant wolf make his body less stiff, and these are just the results of genes, not all fused. If all digestion is complete, there should be some other surprises. Stop it. Cha Shiyu looked at the body that had been torn into pieces, his eyes a little lost, a little unreal. From now on, I can only stop being a human being